Hi folks, I'm the Bald Guy, and these are Bald Guy Basics. Several months ago I made some videos about refinishing rifle stocks, and I mentioned something about bluing. And today I want to show you on a small example how you can re-blue metal, specifically gun parts if you have them. And I'm thinking of those that you have some legacy pieces, the things that were handed down by your father or pieces that you bought as a collector. A few months ago, it's June now, and last winter I took a man a load of firewood, and he went out into his shed, and I'm talking a very open shed where it did not really shield adequately from the weather. He brought me an old shotgun, and if you can see here, there are a number of cracks along this thing. It's cracked here, 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 back here. It's busted all to pieces. And I use this as an example of how to repair by gluing and clamping a stock back together. And the piece is now somewhat solid. There's only so much you can do. But there came with it the metal. Now, this was a non-functioning firearm, and I don't see how it could ever be put together without just buying everything new. So there's nothing I can do to fix it. So I want to make that clear. But here is the trigger guard. I'll put it here first and show you. There we go. Had it backwards. That would cover the trigger itself that would extend through the bottom of the stock. And as you look at this thing is really coated in rust. In fact, I don't know. Now, I have already cleaned it, but I've not done a scrub. So what we're going to do today is to demonstrate for you how you can take something like this, which is vintage is an understatement. This thing is corroded, and how you can restore it and put finish back on it. Now, if you're a collector, you already know this, but for those of you who are not, there is a class of people in the firearms collection environment that when you clean up an old piece like one of these and you destroy what they call the patina, they say that ruins the trade-in value. So if you have a legacy piece that you're worried about its monetary value, let me say right up front that you don't need to do this. But what we're going to do is just demonstrate on this meaningless trigger guard how much benefit you can get from a restoration in terms of, I do this because it's pleasing to me. And I showed you on the video that I did of the single shot 22 rifle, I took the trigger guard and very easily was able to restore it to a very respectable status. And I wanted to remove some of the blemishes along the barrel. But here I've got a piece that is pristine in its corrosion, so I can show you start to finish what we're going to do. The basics that you're going to need, the chemical, this is Hoppy's Gun Blue. It's a bluish clear liquid that has what are called bluing salts. And I don't know if you can see in the bottom, I've already shaken this. I've had this since the, I don't know, early mid-90s. So we're talking about 30 years or more that I've had this particular bottle. The salts will settle, just shake them back up. But this is considered a hazardous material. One of the reasons you can't find as many gunsmiths who do this is because this is considered hazardous waste. The bluing salts that they use, this is what is called cold blue. But there's a misnomer to that. So what you're going to need is a piece that needs restoration. Let me get this stock out of the way. You're going to need a way to clean that. What I'm going to do is to take a Dremel tool, high-speed rotary tool, with a metal brush, and we're going to brush this down. Then I'll go over it with a touch of sandpaper. I'm giving you the end of the video here at the beginning. And then you will clean it. I use lighter fluid, which is a great way because the lighter fluid will evaporate and not leave any oily residue. You want this thing completely clean. Then we are going to heat it. I know it's cold blue, but when you apply cold blue to a cold piece of metal, you don't get good results. We're going to heat this to anywhere from 150 to right at 200 degrees. Going to make it uncomfortable to hold, but it opens up the pores of the metal, and then we'll simply use a Q-tip applicator, and we'll go over this thing and we'll watch this thing really come to shine. So let me get set up a little better here, and this is something that any of you can do. Cold Blue is available even on Amazon. I have not looked to see the price. A little bit goes a long way, so unless you're planning on doing this, you know, industrially, a bottle like this will do the average person for many, many years. Sandpaper, basic tools, and you're going to use, you'll need a little tray of some type. I've showed it other videos. After I feed the dog, we have a small dog, these little tinfoil trays, just wash them out and dry them off, and they make great little temporary project things, and when I'm done I can throw the thing away. So I'll be doing that, and let's get started. All right, I'm beginning with just an inexpensive, relatively inexpensive Craftsman rotary tool. This thing will run up to about 5,000 RPMs. I've got a Dremel that I can get 20,000 RPMs out of, but I'm starting with a circular nylon bristle brush. It's not necessary to start with the nylon. I'm doing it kind of deliberately. It will show me if there are any things I need to be aware of under this initial layer of corrosion. I like it specifically because I can get it into here. It's not taking the corrosion off, but it is taking the dirt off, any loose particulate. And just that quickly, I've run over it. I like being able to get up into the curve of this very easily. I'm going to start with a steel brush that's going to be quite a bit more abrasive. Be sure that you wear eye protection. I am wearing glasses, so that's going to serve as mine. This thing will throw off a lot of very fine particulate, and I'm also going to put a mask on. This last year, excuse me a moment, this last year I've had sinus surgery, and one of the things my ENT doctor told me is, you know, be a little more aware of particulate getting in there. So for this particular operation where I'm going to be generating particulate, I'm going to put a mask on just to protect myself. And you don't need to start with super high speeds on your brush. You're seeing how I touched it. It's going to begin immediately. One of the things you got to be careful with these when you go to buy your rotary tools, be aware of what you're buying. Cheaper tools, you won't just throw particulate off of a piece of metal. You'll actually throw these little bristles, and they will stick you like a needle. So be aware of, you know, you get what you pay for. Let me stop and show you where I'm at. So I've come from here forward. There is the metal that was actually against the wood of the stock. It was more protected. Look at the difference in the metal here and how the corrosion really builds here. Already I'm getting a smoother feel, but I'm just going to have to take my time and go all the way around this inside and out, and don't forget to do the edges. Here's what I'm looking for. I'm going to use a little work platform, probably out of the camera sight here, but I need to put this on something solid because I need to put a little bit of pressure on this thing and let this thing really do its job by getting some friction. I'm not sure you can see it, and I've taken most of it off, but along this edge, the metal is actually bubbled up, and right there you can see some of that bubbling. It was even worse here. Don't be afraid to take enough of that off, because you're not removing metal, you're removing corrosion. So you're already seeing, I'm seeing more of the original bluing under here, and you just got to let this machine do its thing. Always, when you pause, look at your brush, because these things will erode away, and you want to keep plenty of metal for the abrasion. And when you run out of metal, get a new brush. All right, there's the outside edge. I always run my fingers over it to look for rough spots. I'm trying to get as much of that off as I can, but there's the work we've done. And it took multiple applications, because each time I'm taking a little more material off, and I'm looking for that metal shine, which we're beginning to get here, although there is still a rough appearance, but we're going to address that with some sandpaper. But just to give you perspective, then there's the unaddressed side, which is going to take a little bit more detail work here, because I'm on the inside of curve, so just bear with me. All right. Now, I'm certainly that I'm going to edit out some of the footage, so you haven't seen me doing this the whole time. For the sake of time, I just cut some of that space out. And I didn't look at the clock, so I'm not 100% sure, but this whole process has taken me like 7-8 minutes. And I have a result here that, for all intents and purposes, we could blue this right now. I would clean it. Look how the inside cleaned up. It's amazing how much bluing is preserved under that rust. And basically this old shotgun was stuck out in what wasn't much more than a lean-to. It had a roof over it, but the walls were kind of like my dad grew up in. He said we used to look at the floor and see the chickens under the cabin where they stayed back in the Depression years. And that's the way this thing was stored, so it had a lot of damage. There's a little bit of scratching and some bending right here where the screw holes went through. So the next step that I'm going to do is find a fine grain of sandpaper, and we're going to see if I can get a little smoother finish here. So bear with me once again. By the way, this is some of the handiest stuff ever. It's a stainless steel scrubber. There's no soap in it. It's a highfalutin Brillo pad. But when you see these, especially at a hardware store, they're great to have around, because you can put them on gun barrel, you can put them on chrome, and they won't scratch, but they will remove corrosion. But I have some 320 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to go over this thing. And you can see how it's turning brown. It means there's still some corrosion here. There is a slight bevel to the metal here, so I'm having to kind of work. I can't sand the whole surface at any one time, so I'm having to go back and forth. It's really great on a curved surface to use your hands rather than a sanding block, because you can actually get the sandpaper to conform to the curvature a little more conveniently. And I'm rotating this to kind of catch the light, but you can see the area there it's almost caught in the bevel is, so you've really got to work to get those areas that are not cooperative. And just take your time. Part of what I do is I'll sand a little bit and then just rotate it in the light, and that reflection as it changes will show me where I need to continue to apply my efforts. Look at the difference from here to here. See, I'm getting a nice polished metal look begin to appear here. I am, or have been, a fan of the show Forged in Fire, where they make knives, and that's kind of the inspiration that got me into doing some knife making, but I don't do forging. But I heard one of the participants, or maybe one of the judges, say, you know, you hear the name of the show Forged in Fire and you think that these people spend all their time on the forge. He said Forged in Fire is more likely sanding and polishing than it is forging. And that's where they spend the majority of their time. I am here to tell you that in terms of feel, I now have a smooth piece of metal here where I'm working. I can go back here and I can feel very small bits of that bubbling that is still there. So this is doing exactly what I want it to do. Now if I had, and I haven't run into a spot yet, see what I am running into. You're seeing deformations where this thing has been dinged over the years, you know, where somebody threw it into the back of the truck or threw it into the closet or dropped it somehow or dropped something against it. And I can see the minute deformations in the metal. And that's part of the character of a legacy piece. So many collectors now. I follow a lot of knife collectors, case knives, people, and when they sell them, they'll say this knife is unused, uncarried, unsharpened. New in the box kind of covers it for me, but there is a mindset among so many collectors that these things should not be used. Well, with these legacy family heirloom kind of gun pieces, that especially for you in rural areas, your dad, your granddad probably did a lot of hunting. If they grew up like my parents did and my grandparents, it was not a sport, it was survival. But there's no reason we can't make it look a little newer. So you're seeing silver, 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 and getting back in here to the dark. That's the original bluing. And yes, I'm trying to take as much of that off as I can. I'm not going to be fanatical about it, but I'm just going to scuff. I don't have the bubbling on the inside of this to the same degree, so I'm not really going to work it that hard. I'm going to scuff the surface. But I'm half done on the inside already. It was the easy half. It's another issue. One little spot there that I just can't get my finger down into. But I'm going to live with that. I'm just going to hit it with a good old WD-40, which does a pretty good job at washing corrosion away. Oh my goodness. But I would never go from here to bluing, because WD-40 will leave a petroleum and whatever else is in this stuff. I don't know if it's got silicone in it or not, but it will leave a lubricant on here that we do not want. But here is what's coming off and here's what's left behind. So really doing what we want it to do. Let me look ever so briefly. All right, friends, we're back. In our absence, which it's only been maybe 5 minutes since I turned the video off, I did not find my lighter fluid, but what I did find is just as good. A bottle of isopropyl rubbing alcohol. This is 70% alcohol. It has a great rate of evaporation. It leaves surfaces clean and dry. So I simply took my towel and laid it on there and just drenched it in this and then rubbed every surface and then did it again. And what I did then, so we're ready to go to the next step. What I did then, what you can't see right over here off the counter, off the camera, I'm sorry, but on the counter, is a old air fryer that we had in the kitchen forever. And it got kind of stained up and we lost one part, and my wife said, well, I guess we need to throw that away. And I'm like, no, because, ouch. I just got one of those little wire bristles from that rotary tool out of my thumb. It's the perfect thing to heat a metal, a piece of metal of any kind. This is a power air fryer oven, and I set it to 180 degrees, and what I've gotten here is just a little pair of snips. Got too much on this circuit here. I heard it click in. But we're going to bring that out. It's been in for 3 or 4 minutes. So all I'm doing is bringing this metal up to temperature, and I was going to use a clean dog food bowl, but what I'm simply going to do, you can see those Epsom salts already settling. I'm going to shake this up, and this is my applicator, a plain old-fashioned Q-tip. Put that on the left side because I'm going to hold it with the left side and apply with the right. And the one thing you need to do, is protect your hands. I find that if I inflate these a little bit, it's easier to get my hand into them without tearing them. I always get tickled when you put these on and you have a little air at the end of your finger. While I'm doing this, I'll give you a humorous story. Just take a second. I did a video the other day, and I did it without my hat on. So I go to edit the video, and I looked, and you've heard of bald people being accused of reflecting the sunlight. The lighting was absolutely horrible, and I figured it was just because the way the camera was picking up the reflection off my head, it changed its exposure. So the reason I wanted this for the shop has nice metal baskets, and there is our piece of metal ready for the application. And I'm going to change the camera angle, so just bear with me a minute. I want you to see how simple this procedure is. The bluing begins almost immediately. And I just continue to work it in. Look at the difference. See, I've not applied it here yet, but you see that oxidization. That's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's what we want, and it will polish very nicely in just a few minutes. See, I'm getting some residue off the metal, and yes, I'm going over it multiple times. In a spot that has a different appearance, whether that's because of the shape of the metal or because of inconsistencies in my sanding and polishing, just continue to apply more of the Epsom salts, more of the bluing salts. I'm sorry, Epsom salts. What in the world was I thinking? What I think I'll do is we'll do the outside only for the sake of our time. I am going to go around the edge here, but that's a very quick process. My Q-tip is getting a little soggy, but this is as far as we're going to go. So otherwise I'd just change applicators and start using another one. So I'm looking at some inconsistency right there. Just go over it again. My hand's on the inside of it here. Now, my little tray is still going to come in handy because we've got to stop the bluing process. And for that, a bottle of water I didn't drink all of. I just immersed or filled that little container full of water. And that quickly, let me get rid of this. That quickly, we have addressed and transformed this little trigger guard into a pretty decent looking piece. It still, to me, looks old. Remember, there's no oil on this. I will go back when it's all said and done with a little touch of oil. And remember, I only sanded this with 320 grit paper. If I was doing this to actually put on a legacy gun, rifle, or shotgun, I'd have more supplies here. I would have at minimum some 1000 grit sandpaper and probably even some 1500 or 2000 grit to go over, and I would have spent a longer time. But there is our polished edge unblued, and there is our blued piece. So it's still got a patina look to it. It's not a deep new blue, but you know what? We could even, if we're curious about it, we could even apply a little bit more. I got a fresh Q-tip here. I've lost the advantage. Well, that's nice. I've lost the advantage of having warm metal. That cold water cured that. But I can very easily, now that, you know, we've got it clean, I can very easily just heat it back up. And And what I want to do, I'm going to help it a little bit. I want it to dry on the metal. I'm going to re-immerse it in our water. And we're going to dry it off again. The last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to crank up the heat on my little air fryer to 400 degrees. And I'm going to run this thing for a minute or so. Show you kind of what I'm doing here. There's our timer. There's our temperature. And I'm just going to heat this thing up a little bit. In other words, the outer surface will be heated very nicely. And after that's done, what I'll simply do is take this thing over here to the buffing wheel on the bench grinder. I've got a cloth buffing wheel on there, and I will buff this thing and get a nice sheen to it. So give me just a couple of minutes here, and we will finish our process, and you will have seen the whole thing. All right, we've run this thing about 60 seconds. And I'm going to use the dryer of my towels. I heated it up specifically to make sure that it is dry. And while it is warm to the touch, it's not unmanageably so. So bear with me just a minute. Let me turn the camera because I don't want to carry you over there. Yeah, you can see the buffer from here. The buffing wheel already has some compound on it from other projects, usually from knife. All right, I buffed half of this. I did so with a purpose. There is our finished, very brief treatment, and there's the unbuffed side. Hopefully you can see a difference here. Let me rotate it a little bit. I certainly can. But now I could put that back on any old weapon that was on, I can't put it on any old weapon. I could put it on a piece that was restorable, and that has a very respectable look to it without looking fake, if you know what I mean, where people have done such a good job that you realize this old gun never looked that good for the last 60 years. And my only investment, I already had, let me turn this off. The Hops Gun Blue, which others would call Cold Blue, there are other brands out there, does a very nice job. And I'm going to go back and buff the rest of this. I don't have a use in the world for this piece of metal other than the fact of being able to say, hey, I did that. There's our inside edge, unfinished, and our outside edge. Hopefully you can see that. And then our finished edge up to about right here. The very same procedure can be used for your long guns. You're not going to fit it into an air fryer by any stretch of the imagination. Take it out of the stock, and you can put it right in the kitchen oven and heat it to, like I say, the bigger piece of metal, the more you probably want to heat it, because it's going to take you time to blue this thing. If I were bluing, just bear with me a second. This is the shotgun barrel that this thing came off of. And one of my earlier videos was about how to remove rust. And buddy, this thing was rusted. But if I were going to blue this whole thing, rather than a Q-tip, I would use a cotton swab because I can just cover much more area faster. I would heat the whole thing in the wife's, in the kitchen oven to about 175, 180 degrees. And I would let it sit in there long enough for that heat to not just be on the surface of something, but, you know, to get the metal hot all the way through. And you can use, I would certainly use the rubber gloves. Be sure you don't get the powder coated ones when you're doing this kind of thing. And then over them, I've got some leather work gloves over here. I would put those over the top, especially for my offhand that would be actually holding the metal. That would protect it from the heat. But you can get really good results by just taking your time. And I used to try to blue things cold because, you know, it says cold blue. And I was amazed at how poor the results were. And a good friend of mine said, you're missing one little trick. So don't forget to heat your metal before you apply your bluing salts, and you'll make a much better result. I am the Bald Guy. I hope you've enjoyed this. Hope you'll leave us a like. Hope you'll subscribe to the channel if you have recommendations for projects. I'll tell people all the time, I am not an expert. You're looking at someone who is learning as they go and then sharing what they learn, because I want you to understand you can do things you've never done before. You got to be willing to mess up once in a while. So for me, this was a great way to demonstrate, because if I messed it up, this is not something that I was worried about keeping in any stretch, in any event. So we'll see you on the next video.